Welcome to the Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
My name is Odile Evans. I'm news correspondent with the Irish Farmers Journal, and I'm joined here today by our beef market specialist, Phelim O'Neill, to talk about the case of BSE that has been identified on a farm in County Louth. So, Phelim, it's obviously bad news for the Irish beef industry, and what does it mean to us?
It is bad news. It's not something that we had wanted to have discovered. However, the reality is it is an isolated example. If we go back to 2002, there was 340 odd cases of BSE in Ireland. As recent as 2009, that figure was 9, and in 2012 we had 3 cases. The last case we had was 2013. We had went 2 years without any cases of BSE, so I suppose we had thought that we had came to the end of that problem. The reality is it has been working its way through the system, working its way out of the system, and we were in a position where last week we were announcing in the Irish Farmers Journal that Ireland now had qualified for negligible risk BSE status, as defined by the Animal World Health Organization, known as OIE. Now, that would have been fantastic to get into that category. It's the highest and best class in terms of BSE risk that there is. It's currently occupied by countries like Australia, New Zealand, most of the South American countries, the United States, and many European countries, but not all. If this case is confirmed, and I understand it'll take a week or so for that to come through, it could well mean that Ireland will, after a very, very short time, being a negligible risk country, revert to its previous status, which was controlled risk. But as we had developed our industry over the past decade or more on the basis of that status, there's no reason that it should have any serious impact at all.
What potentially does this mean for the markets for Irish beef then?
Well, if we had been able to continue with our negligible risk status, we had a fantastic story to go out and tell the world in terms of selling beef to them. We had no further explaining to do about BSE and the measures that we have in place to control it here. That would have made the marketing job a bit easier, but it's still not impossible. Remember, over the past decade, we have opened markets in many Asian countries such as Hong Kong, Japan. We're on the point, hopefully, of doing business with China. We had the USA approved this year. That was all achieved on the status that we had prior to last week. So nothing changes really from a practical point of view in the Irish beef industry. We have to operate with the restrictions that controlled risk status brings. The most significant of these for an Irish farmer is the cost that we have for disposing of specified risk material, SRM as it is known as. Now, that material is any part of the animal that comes in any contact whatsoever with the central nervous system of the animal. If we had achieved negligible risk status, much of the product that currently has to be destroyed and disposed of through approved rendering premises at a considerable cost, it wouldn't have to be destroyed any longer. In fact, it could be harvested and used as a potential revenue. It could be sold, and there are parts of Asia that buy many parts of the animal that we wouldn't traditionally use in Europe. That, I suppose, is a great miss. That would have been worth, anything around €4 or €5 per bovine animal, but it's something we haven't had in many, many years since before the BSE became an issue, and I suspect we just continue to trade and live with that situation.
And ultimately, is it going to affect cattle prices for us?
We would expect not, because again, we never had the opportunity to avail of the negligible risk status. It was only announced a week ago, and we never had the opportunity to go out and trade internationally with this newfound status. So, if you like, we never got there. We won't be losing anything. We revert back to where we were. So, as for beef markets and as for farm gate prices, things should just continue on the normal course that they had been on.
And then my final question is, how is this suspected case of BSE going to affect my safety as a consumer?
The whole issue of consumer risk from BSE was something that was a very live and a very real debate in the mid-1990s. That was 20 years ago. Procedures were put in place. You may recall there I mentioned how the specified risk material has to be disposed of. Any part of the animal that is in any way associated with the brain central nervous system is disposed of and rendered through a thing called Category 1, the highest risk of animal byproduct that there is. That is disposed of, never enters the food chain. Prior to BSE being a major issue back in the mid-1990s, all of that product did go into the food chain, and that was where the risk occurred to the human population, and that was why there was a great fear at the time. No one had known how long BSE had been an issue before it was visibly discovered, and there was a great fear that people were actually carrying the disease that would only manifest itself later. Now, thankfully, that didn't turn out to be an issue. As BSE, the incidence of BSE has been reduced to the point that is now a one-off every couple of years. Therefore, the risk to we had covered the risk to the human population from disposing of the animal byproduct anyway. But the fact that the disease virtually no longer exists should be a further reassurance to consumer. The final point that I would emphasise from the point of view of a consumer safety on BSE is the fact that in Ireland, we have traceability and we have inspections of cattle immediately prior to slaughter and immediately after the slaughter process by qualified veterinarians in the meat plants. The fact that this level of inspection takes place, plus all of the on-farm inspection, we hear our farmers, and the Irish Farmers Journal regularly gets complaints to farmers about the level of bureaucracy they have to live with, form filling, record keeping, etc. It's at times like this that we can be really, really glad that our farmers do comply with all of these things, because it does give that extra consumer assurance that Irish farmers, they record diligently everything they feed, all the medicines they use, and that is the great reassuring fact to consumers that there's nowhere on earth has tighter or stricter controls on their beef production system than Ireland.
The Irish Farmers Journal podcast, online at farmersjournal.ie and on iTunes every Thursday, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.